become instrument or tool of, foreign, propaganda, foreign, machine to undermine and subvert the unity, the stability, of the nation. We are aware that some of the press, the daily media and even the magazines in this country are being financed from outside with the sole objective of misinforming the world, outside Nigeria, of happenings here. They tell all sorts of lies, all sorts of distorted, facts and so on. In most cases, not necessarily for internal consumption, but for external consumption. We have, information, to that.
In reliving my experience as a victim of conspiracy involving supposedly professional colleagues, manipulation by people you trust to act in accordance with the call of duty, and individuals who chose to betray their call to duty as senior military officers meant to defend the sovereignty of Nigeria by using the same positions to acquire political power and influence at the expense of the society. I am seeking to discharge the burden of truth. In discharging this burden, I take full responsibility for what I have said because they are based on facts that are incontrovertible. I will urge all those who are mentioned or involved in one way or the other to stick to the facts if they have the courage to challenge what I have committed into writing in this book. My account in this book is not to tell universal truth, because there is no such a thing. Historians and academics will always tell you that truth depends often on the individual stating them. Truth can be contested because they are based on the personal experience and interpretation of the person rendering the accounts. That, I think, is the reason that even with the same set of facts, different people end up with different and sometimes contradictory versions of what the truth is. I have chosen to tell the truth as I know in relation to the role I played at some critical points in Nigeria's recent political experience. In telling the truth from my own perspective, I have provided as much facts as I could gather or recollect from my entire career in the army or from the four walls of the prison where my life hung in a precarious balance until the ultimate truth which sets me free prevailed. I want to remark, however, that my experience as recounted here should not be weighed on the same scale with that of many of my compatriots who have appropriated to themselves heroic roles in the Civil War, or those that have written about their involvement in the Civil War from the perspective of Biafra. I do not claim to have any heroism of that nature. What I do lay claim to is that there were critical moments in Nigeria's recent history that will remain beclouded in guesswork, speculation, and even abstract hypothetical formulation about what happened, who played what role, and what was the motive. Some of these events, which I know so much about, include the series of foiled coups that started with Major Gideon Oka and with those that followed in the Abacha era. It is important that I state the facts as I know because of the dismissive use of the word phantom coup by officers and statesmen involved to cover up their shameful roles. Another contentious issue in Nigeria's recent history was the emergence of General Sani Abacha as military head of state. The details of the context may not be available to us now, maybe in the fullness of time, as philosophers will often say. Maybe the facts will be known if people like General Ibrahim Babangida chooses one day to make them public, considering his relationship with General Sani Abacha. But the aspect that I happen to know very well and at my fingertips relate to the palpable signals that Abacha wanted to transform himself to a civilian president. Abacha never told me he had such an ambition in all my conversations and interactions on this matter. It was something I could decipher from his condoning officers and individuals known to be close to him in their open campaign for this to happen. When you are confronted with the dilemma of General Abacha wanting to be end product of a transition program which he initiated as I was, it becomes a tough choice. In some of my sober moments, I consider the Abacha project of transmuting into a civilian president as comparable to the futility of an individual who chooses to stand on the path of a train that has failed brake. It becomes useless display of bravery because that will not stop the train from crashing him, and yet you are going to be killed. What I'm saying here is that for an individual like me to openly challenge my CNC at that point was not a wise decision. It would not be defendable within the test of a personal loyalty that my position required, or the respect or hierarchy which is the most adored value in the military. And yet, one had to play the role that must be played for posterity to record. This was the essence of my tour of army formations as the Chief of Army Staff, as I have tried to tell the story earlier. In this category of important developments in the history of our country, in the conspiracy in the military circles, within and outside the power at the time, to railroad Chief Olusegun Obasanjo into the presidency after many Nigerians, especially pro-democracy groups, fought to restore civilian rule. I have learnt one lesson though. The lesson is that some of the excesses associated with military rule in this country, including failed self-succession plans, have the active support of a section of civilians and the political class. It was evident even under the military regime of General Ibrahim Babangida, when sections of the media, even from the critical southwest parts of Nigeria, openly called on General Babangida to cancel presidential primaries that produced General Shehu Yaradua and Umaru Shinkafi on the platforms of the Social Democratic Party SDP and the National Republican Convention NRC respectively. The simple reason for the clamor was how could the party primaries throw up two northern candidates? Of course, General Babangida happily cancelled the primaries, and that justified another elongation of the transition program. I think this became even more manifest during the Abacha era. To start with, it was a section of the political class that openly called on the military to take over when it looked as if the actualization of June 12 was becoming elusive. Abacha only took advantage of that campaign when the legitimacy of the interim national government was finally shattered by a federal high court ruling. If we all recall, the transition program of General Sani Abacha, which led to the convening of a constitutional conference in 1994, appeared credible at the beginning. I have heard that the 1995 constitution, which was a product of that conference, was one of Nigeria's best constitutions. Unfortunately, this constitution was never promulgated for the reason we all know, because the transition program changed course and General Abacha died. Many pro-Abacha campaigners and those who orchestrated his adoption as a consensus candidate of the 5 political parties were civilians, even though the logistics were provided by Abacha's henchmen. In the usual manner, Abacha became the only one who the cap fits, without whom the future of Nigeria was hanging in a balance. This is where we must recognize the role of patronage dispensed by military presidents. And indeed, Nigeria's military leaders and even civilian presidents enjoy so much revenue inflow from the good international price of petrol, which financed the patronage. The patronage can be tempting for both military officers around the president and for members of the political class who speak the language of democracy in daytime but sneak into the presidential villa in the night to cut deals. My decision to make public my views and tell my story in a layman fashion is to put things in perspective regardless of whose ox is gored. It is neither about self-glorification nor about the expression of anguish about Nigerian authorities past and present. It is to enable Nigerians come to terms with aspects of their past and why the search for development and democracy may elude the present generation if we fail to make determined efforts to change things. It is in this same spirit that I feel obliged to offer some insight into what has come to be known as Abacha loot. A lot has been said about the Abacha loot. It is the sexiest story that Nigerian journalists make front headlines. The social media is equally awash with all manners of comments, including expensive jokes about Abacha. But even more importantly, the subject of money supposedly looted by the late General Abacha is a key issue in Nigeria's diplomatic relationship with many Western countries. I am not in position to defend General Abacha or suggest he did not tamper with the wealth of Nigeria, because I was not in a position to know how, as the head of state, he handled Nigeria's funds. I am also not naive about the political implications of offering some objective comments on the well-publicized looting of Nigeria's treasury by General Abacha. For example, calling the funds Abacha loots entitles members of his immediate family to benefit from the money. My motivation is not to hurt members of his immediate family or put obstacle on their path in seeking to benefit from the funds. I am, however, in a position to say what I know led to a transfer of funds to some countries in Europe and maybe other countries outside Europe. It is a known fact that Nigeria was virtually abandoned by some of its traditional Western allies during the Abacha government, and it became very difficult for the country to purchase arms and ammunition to conduct operations in Liberia and Sierra Leone at the time, especially after the execution of Ken Saro-Wiwa. In light of the increasingly battered international image of Nigeria, and even references to Nigeria in academic circles as a rogue state, some decisions had to be taken if Nigeria was to continue to play its role as a stabilizer in the West African region, a role very much valued by the United Nations. A decision was therefore reached to keep money in some countries that were a bit friendly to Nigeria. This decision was taken at a meeting in which the then Minister of Finance, Chief Anthony Ani, was present. It was agreed that some funds be transferred to some selected countries to ensure that government was in a position to get vital imports as and when necessary. That informed the transfer of funds to some countries. I am glad that Chief Anthony Ani, the then Minister of Finance, once tried to explain this in a newspaper publication. In fairness, this decision actually helped the Nigerian army get relief when our troops in Sierra Leone ran out of ammunition, sometimes in 1997 or 1998, and we had to get ammunition within a very short time. We were able to get this ammunition because we had money abroad. At that time, General Abacha was the head of state and Minister of Defense. He approved the emergency purchase of ammunition, which was paid from funds taken to a friendly country. Without this, we would have had serious embarrassment in Liberia and Sierra Leone.
I was highly embarrassed in 1999 when we were taken to, we transferred from Ikoyi prison around November or December. That was when I heard the word Abacha loot. I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed. I was very embarrassed. And I reacted. Why? Where was the money from? What was it for? Who kept the money? How much was the money? And when was this money stashed out? How was it taken out? Tenuership of General Abacha. For the 4 years, 7 months, he found himself in power. Abacha has had numerous attacks, away from the few that was mentioned. There were collaborations between some notable Nigerians and some international powers to remove him out of office. General Abacha is dead. But those he stepped upon decided to invest by smearing his name. In Nigeria, over the years, decades, there are some people who have grown bigger than the laws of Nigeria, bigger than security agencies of Nigeria, bigger than governments in Nigeria. But during Abacha's tenure, in the course of trying to remove him out of office violently, Abacha had to defend himself, and he allowed the law to take its course. So notable Nigerians were arrested. They were tried. They never take it in good light. They have still not forgiven General Abacha. And I have my reasons for saying not yet. They have not yet forgiven Abacha, even at death. Now, sanctions also were threatened upon Nigeria. And the survivability of the government then, to my knowledge, was a key thing. There was also a decision at one point in time where some stakeholders of Nigeria were invited to Abuja at Brigade of Guards officers' mess, at a mess called Camp Bassett officers' mess in Abuja. Traditional rulers, key politicians, key businessmen from the north to the south who sat down to converse. At that time, Chief Tommy Kim was foreign minister. And when sanction was threatened on Nigeria, at the request of some notable Nigerians, some modalities were taken to allow some money go to some accounts abroad, so that when sanction comes, that money will be able to keep Nigeria afloat. At that time, oil was $7, $8. No loan was taken to run Nigeria. Policies were taken, including PTF, so that Nigeria could grow. At one time, from prison, I wrote a note to late General Abacha's family, and I said, in the name of God, don't get cowed down from the pressure and the segregation and the abuses you receive every day. Come to the fore and tell the whole world whatever is in the contents of the money they are talking about as loans. The dates of lodgement of that money will show whether monies were kept in his name before he became head of state, and monies that were kept in his name after he became head of state. That is step one, to do yourself justice. I suggested. Number two is also to give history as to what that money was kept and meant for. There are stakeholders you can go for. I was in detention at that time, but I can remember faces of many, many big men who attended that Abuja Kambasi meeting where this decision was taken. And all these people are there. But then, unfortunately, till this moment, I don't think there was any interview that was presented to these personalities, and there are many.
The purchase of this ammunition within a short while also brought me into serious conflict with the security operatives, especially the DMI, as the contractors who flew this ammunition into Kaduna, where the army had an army ammunition depot, were invited for questioning on the ground that I brought in the ammunition with the intent of overthrowing the General Abacha government. I was then out of Lagos, and the contractors contacted me and told me what was happening. I told them not to worry and they should not answer any questions. I believe that the security operatives contacted General Abacha, who must have told them that he approved the purchase of ammunition. No one ever asked me or talked to me about this issue till I retired from the service. I also believe that the former head of state, General Sani Abacha, contributed to the Abacha loot issue because when he took over as head of state, the present governor of Kebbi State, Senator Abubakar Atiku Bagudu, was brought to me by Alhaji Buhari Bala, who was then Minister of State, Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He informed me that he had 700 million United States dollars, which he kept for General Abacha. I told him I did not believe him. I then asked him if Mohammed Abacha was aware of this money. He told me that Mohammed Abacha was aware. I then asked him to bring Mohammed Abacha to see me. He came with Mohammed Abacha and Alhaji Buhari Bala, and Mohammed Abacha confirmed that the money was there. I then went to General Sani Abacha and told him about this money and suggested that we return the money to the central bank from where the money was withdrawn. He agreed initially, but later sent the National Security Advisor, General Abdullahi Mohammed, to tell me to keep off from that money. The money, to the best of my knowledge, was never returned to the central bank, and only General Abubakar can explain how the money ended up. It is this act of returning the 700 million by Senator Abubakar Atiku Bagudu without anyone knowing about this money that makes me have respect for him, as not many Nigerians would have returned such money. I believe it is from here that the question of the Abacha loot started. Let me emphasize that I was not and still not in a position to know the financial dealings of General Abacha as head of state, but was aware of what necessitated transfer of funds to some countries, especially for the operations Nigeria was involved with in Liberia and Sierra Leone. It is left to the Nigerian people to launch a serious and systematic probe into millions of Nigeria's funds stashed in foreign banks so as to get to the root of the matter. My point, and I stand to be challenged, is that decision was taken in the best interest of Nigeria at the time to keep Nigeria's money outside the country. The mode in which these funds were moved outside and whether the accounts were opened in the name of the government, persons, or companies are issued beyond my personal knowledge. As a country, Nigeria needs to be reformed. My experience in the military, which I have recounted in some detail, leads me to the conclusion that everything must be done to safeguard democracy and keep the military completely out of power. An average military officer in Nigeria is fully aware of the professional obligation of the military to defend the territorial integrity of the country and support peace operations within and outside Nigeria. Therefore, the challenge which the country must face today is to invest in the training and retraining of officers and soldiers to keep abiding faith in this role.
We are committed, we are sincere, and we will do everything possible. But you know exactly what we went through in this nation. You know the basis and the reason why even in 1992, about 13 or 23 presidential aspirants had to be disqualified. And we knew exactly what happened in 1993 when, what happened when even the election had to be cancelled and so on. So what we have done is to take necessary, measures to ensure that some of these, incidents are avoided. But at the same time, the transition program is for the nation, but the major players in the transition program are the politicians themselves. So the politicians themselves will have to come and bury their differences. Will have to play politics the way it is, not politics of animosity, not politics of religious or ethnic, sentiments or anything. No matter how devastating to the unity and stability of the nation, once it favors that individual politician, he is ready to exploit it at the expense and at the cost of the unity or stability of the nation. So what we have done is clear, it's simple, it's straightforward, and it's step by step. But I tell you, we know we are all Nigerians. The politicians themselves, it's a big challenge on them. They need a change of attitude, a change of mind for them to come and play responsible politics. And that's why even as far as rotation is concerned, as far as power sharing is concerned, which is the main issue in the politics of this country, we took the pain to go into detail and divide this nation into 6. So the question of majority, the question of minority is absolutely immaterial. It's question of quality. It's question of the individual Nigerian who possesses the right leadership, who possesses the right quality. That is the issue.